minutes. 19 minutes. 4 years ago on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2017, 19 minutes into President Trump's administration, at 12:19 p.m., the Washington Post headline was, "Campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." It's always been about getting the president, no matter what.
Congressman Jim Jordan, they're blasting Democrats and some Republicans for impeaching President Trump a second time with just days left in his administration. Good Thursday morning to you. Welcome to National Report. We're glad you're here. I'm Sean Kreisman.
I'm Emma Reckenberg. Lawmakers said they had to impeach the president because he allegedly incited the mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol last week. But new reporting shows the attacks on the Capitol were planned days in advance. The Washington Post also reporting that. An FBI report warning of war at the Capitol, contradicting claims from Democrats there was no indication of looming violence.
And CNN also reporting that evidence uncovered so far, including weapons and tactics seen on surveillance video, has led investigators to believe the attack on the U.S. Capitol was not just a protest that spiraled out of control. Last night, President Trump again condemned the violence in a video released on the White House official Twitter account. Here's that.
Violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country and no place in our movement. Making America great again has always been about defending the rule of law, supporting the men and women of law enforcement, and upholding our nation's most sacred traditions and values. Mob violence goes against everything I believe in and everything our movement stands for.
Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says Democrats have gone too far in their attacks against President Trump and says she plans on fighting back when the Biden administration is sworn in. We'll speak with her about those efforts in just a moment. But first, we head to Washington following the historic day in Congress. White House correspondent Emerald Robinson is live for us this morning. Emerald, good morning.
Good morning, Emma. Great to see you. Well, it's impeachment times two, though Democrats have been talking impeachment since the president's first day in office. And despite his last day in office coming in just a mere days, Nancy Pelosi said yesterday on the House floor that it was absolutely imperative to remove the president, saying he's a danger, despite him repeatedly condemning the violence. Take a listen.
The president must be impeached, and I believe the president must be convicted by the Senate, a constitutional remedy that will ensure that the Republic will be safe from this man who was so resolutely determined to tear down the things that we hold dear and that hold us together.
But now removing President Trump from office before he actually leaves at the end of his term is a non-starter, since Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did make clear yesterday that he does not plan to reconvene the Senate ahead of January 19th, meaning that any trial that would have to happen once President-elect Joe Biden takes office. Now, they're also billing this as a bipartisan impeachment, given that 10 members of the Republican Party in the House did vote to support the impeachment, that 10 being led by Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who is in House leadership, along with Adam Kinzinger and Congressman Valadao from California, among others. But look, that's still only a small percentage of House Republicans, given that over 90% of House Republicans stood behind the president. Also, these GOP House members who are supporting the president are saying that what the Democrats are doing with impeachment directly contradicts the message of unity that Democrats and President-elect Biden are putting forth. In fact, Lauren Boebert, who is new to the House of Representatives, had this to say yesterday. Listen.
Where's the accountability for the left after encouraging and normalizing violence? Rather than actually helping American people in this time, we start impeachments that further divide our country. I call bull when I hear the Democrats demanding unity. Sadly, they are only unified in hate.
A very passionate floor speech from Congressman Boebert. But now, look, the question is, what will Mitch McConnell do? There's been some talk that McConnell sees this as a possible way, the impeachment as a possibility for purging the Republican Party of Trumpism. But look, he has a problem on his hands. The recent Axios Ipsos poll that was released yesterday shows that a majority of Republicans still think that President Trump was right to challenge the election loss, that he isn't to blame for the Capitol mob. They say that they still support him and would even want him to be the Republican nominee in 2024. So if you look at this poll, it shows also just the disparity. If you see the red, that the really incredible disparity between the left and right, and just how much support that President Trump does have in the Republican Party, something that Mitch McConnell will have to consider in how he handles this. Emma, Sean?
Emerald, it appears Trump's influence is not going anywhere anytime soon.
Right.
Emerald Robinson, live for us in D.C. this morning. Emerald, thank you.
Our next guest says enough is enough and says she plans to fight back against the incoming Biden administration. Watch.
We have to make sure that our leaders are held accountable. We cannot have a president of the United States that is willing to abuse the power of the office of the presidency and be easily bought off by foreign governments, foreign Chinese energy companies, Ukrainian energy companies. So on January 21st, I will be filing articles of impeachment on Joe Biden.
Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene making those comments on Greg Kelly Reports last night. She joins us live now to discuss that very thing. Congresswoman, good to see you. Those are bold moves. You teed it up on Twitter. A lot of folks were watching, and there are a lot that do agree with you and follow what you had to say. What has been the reaction from your Republican colleagues on this move?
Well, I've already spoken with quite a few of them before I released this information and my plan to introduce articles of impeachment on January 21st. Look, the Republican Party needs to change things up. The silent majority in this nation is fed up with being the target and not having representatives, not having people in Congress stand up for them. The Democrats, their plan is to tear this country down with socialism, and you can see what happened yesterday with impeachment. They have no intention of creating unity. They have no intention of healing. They only have full-scale plans to make everyone lay down, sit down, and shut up, and just go along with whatever they want to do, which is censorship, which is going to be taking away your Second Amendment rights, which is going to be the Green New Deal, which is going to be wide open borders and Medicare for all. But the real truth is they want to impeach President Trump for absolutely nothing. There was no trial, no evidence, nothing shown that he truly planned or incited the violence that happened at the Capitol that we all condemn. However, it's time to show the truth about Joe Biden, how he abused the power of office as when he was vice president. There's a real investigation going on into Hunter Biden's laptop, and the truth needs to come out there, because we cannot have a man in the office of the president in the White House who is willing to dangle Americans' hard-earned tax dollars out with foreign aid just to help his son, Hunter Biden, become filthy rich through business scams, corruption, business dealings, and partnership with foreign energy companies. This is a dangerous threat to our nation, and it's a dangerous threat for every single American. Specifically, do you know which articles of impeachment you would be pushing for? Abuse of power. All right. I got to ask you the obvious question. Obviously, Republicans don't hold the majority in the House. It is split with a vice president making the decision in the Senate. That would be Kamala Harris at that point. A lot of folks say this won't go anywhere. What do you say back to that? You know what I have to say is it's time to change things up. I'm tired of all the excuses. I'm tired of people saying, well, we're in the minority, we can't do anything. I'm tired of all of that. That's why I ran for Congress. And the American people feel the same way I do. I cannot tell you, my phone has literally not stopped ringing. The messages are pouring in. The support is there. The silent majority, those numbers that you guys just put up on the screen that support President Trump, support this effort to impeach Joe Biden. You want to know why? They're tired of being beaten down and not having representation in Congress standing up for them and saying enough is enough. And this is the only reason why I ran for Congress, because I'm one of those Americans that feels the exact same way. If Republicans do not stand up fight back and tell these Democrats we will not tolerate your beatings anymore, then our country is going to be lost and our children are going to pay the price. The Democrats are the radicals that supported violence all year long with Antifa, BLM. They're the same party that is completely fine with censoring conservatives and taking away our free speech rights. And this is the party that is completely fine with putting a man that is totally corrupt into the president's chair, into the office, into the White House, so that he can just help his son, help his family, become filthy rich and make crazy business deals and sell us out to foreign countries like China.
Congresswoman, I want to get your reaction to this. Some comments from former FBI Director James Comey. What he said needs to happen to unite this country. Here's that.
Now, I don't know whether Donald Trump, he's not a genius, but he might figure out that if he accepts a pardon, that's an admission of guilt, the United States Supreme Court has said. So I don't know that he would accept a pardon, but as part of healing the country and getting us to a place where we can focus on things that are going to matter over the next 4 years, I think Joe Biden's going to have to at least think about that.
And that alludes to the fact that there was wrongdoing by the president, that he would need to pardon himself. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are this. Let's talk about James Comey. He's like the leader of the witch hunt with Russian collusion. So it's pretty laughable to hear him talk about what his advice is for President Trump. The whole Russian collusion conspiracy lie that was shoved down the American people's throat and broadcasted all over the fake news media is absolutely repulsive. So, you know, people really don't care what James Comey's advice is for President Trump, and I don't think President Trump should care either. President Trump has done nothing wrong. It's the Democrats that have done everything wrong. It's the Democrats that continue to divide this nation. They do not want peace. They do not want healing. They do not want to work across the aisle with Republicans for good things for the American people, which is what we should be doing, but that's not what they want. So it's time to stand up. It's time to hold them accountable. We can do that and work on good things for the American people. There's plenty of us in here, and we should be resourceful enough to do a good job for the taxpayers in this nation.
All right, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Still to come.
I was greatly encouraged to see our country unite in condemnation of last week's lawlessness and the rioting. I am further encouraged that despite my Democrat colleagues' claims to the contrary, President Trump is committed to a peaceful and uninterrupted transfer of power. But that's not good enough for my colleagues across the aisle. With just 7 days left in President Trump's term, they are fast-tracking impeachment proceedings.
That is Republican Congressman Guy Reschenthaler of Pennsylvania speaking out against impeachment in the House yesterday. And he joins us here now on National Report. Congressman, welcome back.
Emma, good morning. Thanks for having me on. And as always, just call me Guy, please.
All right, Guy, you got it. Okay, so as you know, it has seriously taken months for Congress to find a solution for COVID relief. But they got a second impeachment through in record speed. The president, as we know, now leaving office in 6 days. What do you make of the Democrats' priorities right now?
Well, clearly, it's 100% motivated. Their actions are 100% motivated by politics. And I think it's absolutely inexcusable that with less than a week, or roughly a week, of President Trump's first term, the Democrats rushed through impeachment. And just look at the backdrop, Emma. You had an entire summer full of chaos, rioting, looting, Antifa engaged in violent acts. And yet the Democrats turn around and instead of cooling the temperature, instead of letting cooler heads prevail, instead of working on issues that would unite us, they turn around and rush through within a matter of literally hours impeachment articles. That's unacceptable. The Democrats should have taken a step back, looked at the situation, said, you know what, we have a new president coming in less than a week. Let's focus on something that will heal this nation rather than divide us.
Well, Democrats were not alone in this. There were 10 GOP members who voted in favor of impeachment, including Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House. Your thoughts on the future of the Republican Party, specifically those members who supported this impeachment?
Well, I'm clearly disappointed that Republicans would vote yes to impeach President Trump, especially the lack of due process. We had no hearings on this impeachment like we have in the past. And again, with less than a week, we also know that even if the Senate were to take up impeachment, it wouldn't take place, Emma, until after Joe Biden is sworn in. So we rushed through this. So I'm disappointed that Republicans voted to impeach. But I think what we need to do moving forward is we need to unite, not only as a Republican Party, we need to unite as American people. And I think that we can start by toning down the rhetoric. We can also work on focusing on issues that will unite Americans. You were talking about COVID relief. We could have had a bipartisan COVID relief bill to follow the other ones that we had in the summer. Instead, it was the Democrats. It was Nancy Pelosi that was trying to push through radical liberal agenda items like giving free health care to illegal immigrants, giving tax cuts to billionaires and millionaires in blue states, bailing out mismanaged blue state budgets that have been mismanaged for decades. It was the Democrats that focused on these divisive issues. Republicans were willing to reach across the aisle and get things done.
So you mentioned toning down the rhetoric and calling for unity at this point. And we appreciate your time, of course, joining us on news programs. We've heard from other members of the House who are also taking time to sit down and speak on news programs as well. And Representative Eric Swalwell spoke with PBS, and he made some interesting remarks about President Trump and his supporters as well. Here's what he had to say, and I'll get your reaction.
Osama bin Laden did not enter U.S. soil on September 11, but it was widely acknowledged that he was responsible for inspiring the attack on our country. And the president, with his words, using the words fight, with the speakers that he assembled that day who called for trial by combat and said we have to take names and kick ass, that is hate speech that inspired and radicalized people to storm the Capitol.
Guy, your thoughts on those remarks from Congressman Swalwell there, and whether that sounds like he's stepping towards unity by that comparison?
Well, those comments certainly were not helpful, Emma. I can say that. But where were the Democrats this summer when they were they calling out each other when you had members of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's campaign teams offering to bail out Antifa protesters when they got arrested? Where were they when Maxine Waters told a crowd to, if you see Republicans or you see members of the Trump administration, to get in their face? Where were they for that? Where were they when AOC said that riots are a way to get noticed and riots are a good thing because they need to make people feel uncomfortable? So where was the condemnation all summer long when Antifa was burning cities and businesses to the ground? I find it a little ironic, a little hypocritical that all of a sudden now the Democrats are condemning violence. I want to be clear about something, Emma. I condemn political violence and mob violence all summer long. When Antifa set up the autonomous zone in Seattle, I condemned it. When they were burning Portland for over a month, I condemned that. Kenosha, condemned that. The Democrats were absolutely silent. And now I'm also condemning the attacks on the 6th. So violent behavior and un-American and unhelpful.
I want to ask you about some comments made by an anchor on CNN, Jake Tapper, where he appeared to question at least, the loyalty of Congressman Brian Mast, who lost both of his legs in Afghanistan. Here's what Tapper had to say.
Congressman Brian Mast, a Republican from Florida, who lost his legs, by the way, fighting for democracy abroad. Although I don't know about his commitment to it here in the United States. He said, did anybody say that?
Yes.
Yeah, we heard him.
The answer is yes. Yes.
And he actually doubled down on those remarks on Twitter, saying that he questioned his commitment to democracy of anyone who spread election lies by signing on to that, quote, deranged Texas AG lawsuit and voted to commit sedition. Your thoughts on Tapper's remarks on air and then online as well?
Emma, I have a lot of thoughts. First off, let me just say this. Brian Mast is a friend, and Brian Mast is a hero. What he did in the service of our country is heroic, and it was very brave. So to attack Brian Mast's patriotism is misplaced, and it's frankly reckless. Now, talking about individual votes and saying that somehow these votes were undermining democracy is what Tapper suggested in that quote. That is reckless. Where was the mainstream media? And where were these pundits when in 20 Waters, when you had Clyburn, we had all these other Democrats take identical votes that we just took last week? It was not the end of the Republic when the Democrats were doing it. But all of a sudden now we're held to this bizarre double standard. And finally, let me just say this, Emma. the mainstream media and their inability or unwillingness to articulate what these votes are actually about is causing a lot of the disruptions you're seeing. Now, I'm not minimizing what happened. I'm not making excuses for what happened on the 6th. But it's time for the media, the mainstream media, to do their job and accurately and fully report what's going on. When they hide information, when they conflate issues, it leads to a lot of the unsettledness and the uneasiness that you're seeing in American society. So I do hold the mainstream media accountable for, again, not the violence, but a lot of the sentiments that you're seeing across the United States that, again, is dividing us.
Yeah. All right. We've got to leave it at that. But that is Guy Reschenthaler, the congressman from Pennsylvania. Always great to see you, Guy. Thanks so much.
You too, Emma. Take care. Thanks.
Welcome back. Yesterday, President Trump made history by becoming the first president to get impeached not once, but twice. However, some conservatives say the move is actually a credit to President Trump.
Like this, editor-in-chief of the National Pulse wrote, quote, "Not gonna lie, being impeached twice is pretty bad ASS," to which Liz Harrington retweeted it, writing, quote, "From this corrupt cabal in Washington, a badge of honor."
All right, they're not the only ones. Next, we've got Jack Maxey tweeting this out saying, "To impeachment? Wow, he is the best in every category." In response, we've got this tweet here from Steve Cortez. He says, "As many impeachments as ice cream scoops. Hashtag baller."
This impeachment would be a serious thing. And so obviously it is a serious thing. But when you look at it from years prior, it would take so long to get through impeachment, to debate it, to push this through. It took 8 hours, and it was used as a weapon against President Trump. Some would argue that, which takes the seriousness back from it if it's so easy to get through and to pass. I mean, it's already done.
Well, it makes you wonder, too, going forward, if you've got a majority in the House, and they don't like the president, could this be used again? I mean, we've already seen this being described as political theater. Speaker Nancy Pelosi apparently has an impeachment outfit that she wore the first time the president was impeached, and she wore again yesterday. So, I mean, come on, are we supposed to be taking this seriously?
And don't forget, they had those signature pins in the first one that they handed out. So it does, in which we had Congresswoman from Georgia on saying, well, hey, I'll bring articles of impeachment against Joe Biden. That would have seemed crazy any other time. But it's not so much now, because if you don't like somebody, you don't like what they do. There was no investigation. That is the other issue about what happened on Capitol Hill.
We just saw people making their points during the debates.
And that's exactly what happened. But nevertheless, there you go. Conservatives responding it that way.
All right. Still to come here on National Report. A new study suggests...
All right, time now for the Newsmax News Minute. We're joined live now by Rachel Roller. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean. Yes, here's a look at some of the stories making headlines today. Former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang says he's running to be the next mayor of New York City. Yang says he sees a city in crisis and he thinks he can be the one to fix it. Now, more than a dozen other candidates have declared, including Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. The Democratic primary will take place this June. Meanwhile, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey says banning President Trump's account sets a dangerous precedent. Dorsey says that he thinks it was the right move, but it could be dangerous for an individual or corporation having this much power over the public conversation. Twitter banned the president last week after the Capitol building protests. And the CEO of social media company Parler says the platform may never come back. John Matt says that he doesn't know yet when or even if it can return after Amazon removed it from its hosting service. Parler then sued Amazon, saying that move was politically motivated. Amazon says the app violated its terms of service by, quote, not removing content it claims encourages or incites violence. Google and Apple also removing Parler from their app stores. Those are just some of the stories we're following, but if you're looking for breaking news, you can always go to Newsmax.com. Sean.
Rachel Roller, thank you. In an effort to slow the number of positive COVID cases, the CDC announcing this, that all international airline passengers will be required to show proof of a negative COVID-19 test before boarding any flights to the United States. Joining us now to discuss this and all the latest COVID news, Dr. Jonathan Baugh. He's the Chief Medical Officer of Remote Health Solutions. Dr. Baugh, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. I want to ask you about this. Before we get to the testing for travelers, I want to point out that we are almost 2 weeks after the holiday rush of travelers. I want to ask you, as far as terms of where we are today in our country with the death rate, with the infection rate, with hospitals, where are we?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we know is that indeed we are on a climb or have been over the last little while. But personally, in our hospital where I work and see patients, we're down from where we were maybe a week or so ago, but we're still seeing a lot of COVID patients, and we're still seeing a lot of COVID deaths, much like we would expect as we move through these winter months. That's not an unexpected event as we move through this time of season, if we're talking about flu and cold type diseases, which in this situation COVID-19 is.
When you hear about this news of the airlines, if you're taking an international flight, you're going to have to show a negative test. I question this because I myself tested for COVID. I tested positive eventually. This was months ago, but I tested negative not once, but twice. And it wasn't until maybe, I think, 7 days later, I finally pulled a positive test. How effective is this new mandate, if you will?
It's moderately effective. We know that testing is a component. It definitely isn't the full answer. We know that testing is one answer in helping to slow the spread, but we also know that self-quarantine when you get to a new area is helpful as well. And what we've talked about for a long time really has to do with the fact that we need to be doing then you needed to have a negative test if you want to travel to certain countries, then you needed to as well.
Okay, suggesting that having COVID-19 grants immunity. If you've had it, it'll grant you immunity for about 5 months. There's an 83% chance you will not be reinfected again from that study. If this is the case, can those people still carry the virus to others?
Now, so here's some of the question about that, or the answer about that, and what that revolves around is the vaccine really is us trying to mimic getting the disease to start with. And so we know that if somebody has the virus, if they get sick, then they build antibodies. And that's what we initially started to build these vaccines, and the goal around was can we mimic getting those antibodies? And that's the whole goal of a vaccine, to pretend like we just got the vaccine. Or you really shouldn't. And in fact, that's funny. I was actually talking with one of my nurses last night in the emergency department. She's had the virus, and she was being asked why she wasn't going to be getting the vaccine. One of the things I've done with several of my staff is we've sent off to the lab their blood, and we will check their antibody levels. And invariably, their antibody levels are at a protectionary state. So it doesn't make sense for them to be able to get that. It's much like when I was a kid, I got chickenpox. And so I built antibodies against that varicella virus. Now,
continuation of the greatest hoax ever. Congressman Jim Jordan also making a similar argument during yesterday's proceedings in the House. Watch.
19 minutes. 19 minutes. 4 years ago on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2017, 19 minutes into President Trump's administration, at 12:19 p.m., the Washington Post headline was, "Campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." It's always been about getting the president, no matter what.
All right, we are joined now by political analyst Mark Halperin with his reaction. Mark, we all watched the debate yesterday, the Democrats making their argument, the Republicans as well. Of course, we didn't actually have an official hearing or evidence being presented. It was all sort of political theater. At least that's how some are describing it. Nancy Pelosi, on the other hand, calling it national security. How are you viewing this impeachment 2.0 of President Trump?
Well, Emma, I think three things are true at once, and they maybe seem contradictory in a way. One, the Democrats are certainly motivated by personal animus towards the president. Two, the process they used to impeach the president was unprecedented and not according to the president, the normal things the president would be afforded on such a circumstance. And lots of people think that the president had some responsibility for the riot on Capitol Hill, including Mitch McConnell, including Kevin McCarthy, including the 10 Republicans in the House who voted for impeachment. So this is a complicated situation. It's an unprecedented situation. And I think you saw on the floor arguments yesterday kind of a distillation of the entire history of the Trump administration, with Republicans defending him and saying quite correctly the Democrats have been after him from day one, and Democrats saying also correctly a lot of people are holding the president accountable, at least in part, for what happened.
For what happened, right, on January 6th. And that's specifically what the article of impeachment is about. Many people, of course, Democrats making the argument that it was his words that incited the riots and chaos at the Capitol. But we are now continuing to learn information about what happened that day, including this from the FBI. The Washington Post reporting that the FBI had warned of war at the Capitol the day before the riot. So based on their investigations and their findings, they've learned that perhaps this event was being planned days prior to it actually taking place. Makes you wonder how that could influence the Democrats' argument here if, again, this plan was already in place before the president even finished his speech.
Emma, you're absolutely right regarding what Democrats emphasized yesterday and in the impeachment article, that their claim that the president incited this action, which there's some indication, as you said, that it happened anyway. I will say, though, that a lot of what's upset the Democrats on Capitol Hill and the Republicans is not the president's speech, but what he did during Congress in both parties.
And potentially that part of the argument will be presented once this impeachment hearing, they take place in the Senate. We know that will now be after Joe Biden is inaugurated as the next president of the United States. And I want to show for you how Joe Biden has reacted to all of this impeachment. He issued a statement saying in part, quote, "I hope that the Senate leadership will find a way to deal with the constitutional responsibilities on impeachment while also working on the other urgent business of this nation." So based on that statement here, the conclusion I think a lot of people could come to is that he's not necessarily shutting down this idea of impeachment. He's going to let Congress do it. Now, some could wonder, if you want unity, why don't you just come out and say, you know what, he's officially left office. We don't need this right now.
Emma, there's no doubt that Joe Biden is going to be deferential to Congress on a lot of issues as a former senator, and that's just his view of how it should work. In this case, I think if he tried to go against Congress's will, the Democrats in Congress's will, he'd be overridden, and that would make him look even weaker. So at this point, his hands are tied. I wouldn't be surprised, though, to see it change. The old Ohio State football coach Woody Hayes used to say that the reason he did running plays much more than passing is because when you pass, three things can happen, and two of them are bad: interception and incompletion. If they go forward with an impeachment trial, I think three things can happen. And from the Democrats' point of view, at least two of them are bad. One is the president might not be convicted, and once again, he would be triumphant in terms of the efforts to convict him after being impeached. Two is the courts could throw this out, and Democrats would look silly for pursuing an impeachment and a trial so late in the presidency and post-presidency. Finally, they could convict him, and it would have to be a bipartisan vote. But even then, I think you would clearly be dividing the country, because while Mitch McConnell and 16 other senators might think the president should be convicted, it's clear that tens of millions of Americans would be outraged by that. So I think at some point Joe Biden might decide that his agenda is going to be completely overwhelmed by a speedy impeachment trial. And I think they'll either put it off or maybe drop it. And I'm starting to hear that thinking from some pretty senior Democrats as a possibility, as they start to recognize that what they did in the House was unprecedented and fast and maybe unwise.
Yeah, well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Mark Halperin, we appreciate your analysis as always. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Emma.